There we go. We'll talk a little bit about overview of state and local regulatory requirements, and I'll go into a little bit more depth on the state statutes protecting fish habitat, since that's my area of expertise. And then we will briefly discuss the memorandum of agreement with Fish and Game and Alaska DOT, since we've mentioned that a few times already this week. Thankfully, up here, Alaska is a young state. We've had fish habitat protections in place since statehood, so we don't really have the same scale of fish passage barriers that areas in the lower 48 have, like really large dams and diversions. We also have a pretty robust assessment program, as you guys learned about earlier this week, and a lot of tools in place to help develop prioritization for improvement. I think some questions might be asked, well, if fish passage laws have been in place since statehood, why are we still replacing or removing barriers? Why do we have problems? And a number of those exist. We have relic World War II infrastructure, things that weren't permitted, change related to land uplift or subsidence, earthquakes, other kinds of activity like that, hydraulic designs that may have been insufficient, that are insufficient now for current flows. Another one that comes up is definitely limited materials available and expertise for, in rural areas. Hold on one sec, I just realized that I need to fix this so I can see my whole thing. And then additionally, climate change can come up, and also funding. I'm going to change back. Sorry about that. I just had this adjusted earlier today. Now I can't see my notes. This is a table I have put together, just showing the basic permits for local and state governments that I'll be going through today. Sorry, technical difficulties here. There we go, got it. And wanted to make a note that unfortunately, we don't have any statewide coordinating agencies or any kind of questionnaires to help people navigate the permits and authorizations that are usually required for these types of projects. We did have some of that back when we had a coastal program, but we haven't had anything similar since 2011. So some permits do have agency public notice requirements, which help keep us in the loop. But ultimately, it is the applicant's responsibility to ensure that all the permits are applied for. By saying that, I will note that at least for most of the habitat staff statewide and a lot of other resource agency staff, we are aware of requirements that other agencies have. And so we'll do our best to try to help you through the process. Several of the boroughs and municipalities have local design criteria, as Heather noted yesterday, and many of them also have development permits, like flood hazard permits, or something along the lines of a riparian area development permit. And so I wanted to provide an overview with some links. So those will be live in the PDF that you can download, so you can look at these later. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but just to kind of give you an idea of what's out there. This is an exhaustive list, and there's probably some more that I missed, but this is a pretty good overview from the major boroughs and municipalities in the state. So moving on to the state, the Department of Environmental Transportation Conservation took over primacy for NPDES permitting in 2008. And they developed a construction general permit that covers stormwater discharges from construction projects. The notice of intent and stormwater pollution prevention plan requirements, they do vary by location. So I've added a link to ADEC's website here, and you can get some more information on that general permit. The Department of Natural Resources has a few permits that would apply to stream crossing projects. And the most common are a material sale permit for sand and gravel extractions, and a temporary water use permit for diversions around a project or water withdrawals related to project construction. Again, I've included the links that'll take you to the current information for and permitting requirements for both of those. And so I'll focus the remainder of my time on fish and game permits required for stream crossing projects, primarily fish habitat permits. Again, the hyperlinks here will take you to the appropriate place on the Fish and Game website so you can get some more information or permit applications. Fish habitat permits are usually required for work in any fish-bearing stream. There's two authorities that are tied to these permits, and I'll dive into that in a little more detail in the next few slides. Not a lot of culvert projects occur within our state wildlife refuges, critical habitat areas, and sanctuaries, but Fish and Game would have authority over all aspects of the project, more so than just fish passage, like access to the project site, et cetera, and revegetation outside of the stream corridor, if this was in a special area, and then that would require a separate permit. And then the aquatic resource permit issued by the Sportfish Division is really often overlooked. It's almost always needed for stream crossing projects, and it's necessary for moving fish during dewatering and diversion. So basically, if you want to collect fish anyway outside of normal sport fishing means, so if you want to scoop them in a little net, you're going to have to get a permit. And so habitat staff, we might be available to assist with these efforts, and we often try to do that when we can. We really like to be on site, but it is up to the project manager to ensure that they have the staff, the equipment, and a valid resource permit on hand before starting the work. The most commonly associated authority with fish habitat permits is our Title 16 05871, otherwise known as the Anadromous Fish Act. It requires, the first part requires that Fish and Game specifies all the important freshwater anadromous habitat statewide. And this is why the Anadromous Waters Catalog was created. It's also why it's really important to continue updating and improving the accuracy of the AWC. The second part of the Anadromous Fish Act requires that plans for work in these specified streams, in the streams that are in the AWC, are submitted to the department for review, and then we decide to either issue a permit with stipulations, or deny a permit approval. So that would be the fish habitat permit. The strength of the Anadromous Fish Act are that it is broad in scope. It applies to nearly any in-water activity that can impact in anadromous fish habitat. For fish habitat projects, this statute generally allows us to review designs and make decisions based on more than just fish passage. We can look at impacts to habitat or stream function, and also include requirements for stream restoration and re-veg upstream and downstream of the culvert. The limitations of the Anadromous Fish Act do include that we do have little jurisdiction to influence activities in riparian areas above ordinary high water. And we've heard several presentations this week discussing how important that is for habitat function. Additionally, the stream needs to be in the AWC before it's afforded protection under the statute. As Kim mentioned in our talk on Tuesday, the streams listed in the AWC are primarily a function of what has been surveyed. So continuing to update that, it's really important for us to be able to apply these statutes and ensure habitat protection. We do have the ability to require mitigation if a stream is added to the AWC after a project is completed. So in those cases, generally, if anadromy is assumed, we often work with applicants and strongly recommend designing a crossing that would meet the standards we'd apply under the Anadromous Fish Act 871 here, so that they can avoid having to come back and do a replacement or any additional work at the site. The third thing that is unfortunate about our authority limitation is that it is limited to freshwater and certain tidal areas, just that channel out to mean low. So we don't have any jurisdiction in nearshore marine habitats, which we all know can play an important role in the anadromous fish life cycle. So the second authority that we issue fish habitat permits under, it doesn't have any different name as far as the permit, but the authority is the Fishery Act, or 1605-841. it's the lesser known of our authorities. It does apply to any fish-bearing stream and requires that fish passage is constructed around or through any obstruction. So an obstruction would be a dam or a roadway. The fish ladder at the dam on the top photo is obviously an example of something that would meet this criteria. And the culvert in the bottom photo would certainly not meet the criteria of 841 right now. The Fishery Act, or its predecessors, go way back. Territorial Alaska had things related to requiring fishways. Those were a little bit more tied to fish traps and things like that. But we did have a comprehensive fish and game code enacted really quickly after statehood, and there was a predecessor to Section 841 in there. So as with the other authority, just a quick note on the strengths of this: it requires fish passage for all species, and applies to all fish-bearing streams. So it's not limited to AWC streams. And if authorized, this then also requires that the structure needs to be maintained in the long term, can't just be built and left alone. The primary limitations, though, of statute is that it addresses fish passage only. So if a project is not, if a stream is not in the catalog in the AWC, and we don't have any authority to address anything other than fish passage. So we can't necessarily require a stream simulation or other enhanced design features, and some of that revegetation work or stream bank restoration. But fortunately, we don't see many requests for strictly hydraulic design submitted, even for resident fish streams these days. So the last note, I guess, is that the statute does have some archaic mitigation provisions. They don't really accomplish anything, and thankfully they aren't used very often. So back to those actual fish habitat permits. Pre-permitting data is really important. It's important that we know what fish species might be present at the site and what the stream channel and habitat looks like. So in the absence of fish survey data for a specific site, we'll use the AWC, the AFFI layers, and local biologist knowledge, local knowledge period, to determine if fish are likely to be present. And a big note here, can't say it enough, absence of data does not equal absence of fish. So generally, we're going to be more conservative in our decision making when less information is available. But the level of information that's required to develop a stream simulation design, as you guys saw this morning and earlier this week, that's usually going to be sufficient for us to, assure that fish passage is going to be maintained in that project. Applicants do often provide us with preliminary designs, and we do like to talk these things over early on in the process. It's really beneficial usually. Often we can proceed with permit issuance at like a 65% design point in the process. Don't always have to have 100% design, but we may have some additional stipulations in that permit that require a final review. So it's always good to ensure that the key aspects of the design are complete to a point that we know we can ensure fish passage is maintained and the habitat functions are going to be appropriately addressed. We do have stipulations. We have emergency provisions, I guess I should say, in statute, so we can authorize work verbally or by email. An example of this would be a temporary pipe replacement after flood damage. We'll often follow these authorizations with a formal permit after the emergency work is completed. Sometimes we follow up with, a temporary pipe is put in after a flood that might be the similar size to what was damaged, but we'd like to see a bigger one in there, and it needs to be bigger. The resources are not available to put that replacement in right away, or the design needs to be worked out. So often we'll come back a year or two later and they'll get that pipe fixed to fish passage standards. And for those of you working in the Southeast, you might see some fish habitat permits that look a little bit different. We have concurrences that are how we address our Title 16 authority within the National Forest for AWC streams. Some typical stipulations that you might see on a permit are going to be addressing fish passage, of course, diversion and bypass pumping, timing, sediment control methods, re-veg, stabilization, and possibly need to notify us before construction. Diversion plan is often a really big part of our fish habitat permit review process. The species president and the method of diversion can affect timing windows for example, like bypass pumping versus diversion channel.
Hey, Megan, just want to give you your 2-minute time warning there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Some of tomorrow's talks will discuss more ways, the specifics of ways to move water and fish around the site. And we are working internally on some guidance for contractors to help with the how-to fish rescue. Like I said, we're always available to help develop a plan that works best for contractor and fish. We can't always be on site, but we do try to when possible. This was a big Northern Lights Chester Creek replacement from 2020. If you can see, this is the old pipe right here. Here's the diversion channel. This is a unique one where we authorized some pipes in the diversion channel because they had a 30-day window to get this project done. And it's in the fish's best interest for them to get in and out as soon as possible too. So that allowed them to access the site from both sides. That was just some pictures of us working on getting fish out of the old pipes before demo. Quick note on project modifications. They are not unusual up here, of course, as many of you have experienced. Supply chain issues, weather, utilities, geotech anomalies, these can all cause unexpected delays. The big thing here is it's really important to relay any of these issues quickly to resource agencies. I 100% believe in no such thing as over communication. Expecting the unexpected is really important because a lot of modifications are related to water diversion. Generally, we try to ensure that contingencies are in place. That can be really helpful. Extra pumps on hand, et cetera, in case water comes up and your diversion channel can't handle all the flow. And then just remember that timing windows for fish are there for a reason. So we may not be able to be flexible on those. So we'll work really hard to do what we can to get the project moved forward. This was when we had an extra visitor to a project after the diversion blew out. Thankfully, the project hadn't really gotten underway at Arctic Boulevard in Chester Creek. Slowly running out of time, but that's why I left this to the end. Quick, brief description of what the Memorandum of Agreement, the MOA, is with Fish and Game and DOT. It was established in 2001 to provide permitting guidance and consistency in our fish passage culvert reviews, manage the expectations, stipulated roles. We're going to do this, you're going to do this, we're all going to do this. The basic premise is that we developed tiers for our permit review, and each tier requires progressively more engineering and analysis. So tier 1 is a stream simulation, tier 2 is fish passage modeling, and tier 3 is hydraulic design. For the most part, most new design proposals meet or exceed tier 1 criteria. And this does apply to all fish-bearing streams, not just Anadromous or AWC streams. Quick note on what it is not. It is not a plug-and-play statewide design standard, does not cover all hydraulic engineering and design considerations, does not, of course, supersede any federal or local requirements or design criteria, and most importantly, it has not been updated to reflect current best practices and assessment tools. The revision process is underway finally, long awaited. It's very hopeful that we can get that done within the year. There's a working group with DOT and Fish and Game folks working on that right now. So lastly, just wanted to let you guys know we've got 6 offices statewide, Liaison in the state pipeline office. The boundary layer for this is for these regional lines is actually available on the Fish Resource Monitor. So you can click that on if you're ever wondering who to talk to. The access and cost of travel often dictate where and when we can be on site. So it's really important, we often have to rely on photos and reports from contractors or construction inspectors for oversight in areas off the road system. And that gets into what I was speaking of earlier as no such thing as over communication. And because of this, we have a vested interest in getting more consultants, engineers, contractors trained up on fish passage design and installation. so we can ensure proper installation at remote sites or places that we just can't be there to monitor. So with that, my last note is just to say I really appreciate Fish and Wildlife Service and all the presenters and partner agencies making this training possible, so we can have more people ready to do those projects. And that's it.